Hello, good evening, welcome to UPfront. My name is Raymond Acquah. Tonight, I'm bringing back a conversation that was pretty much had in 2015. Now, on the 24th of March in that particular year, the current Vice President addressed a very important, it's actually called Distinguished Speaker Series at the Central University College. The conversation was pretty simple, titled The IMF Bailout, Will the Anchor Hold? Tonight, we are doing a similar conversation after we have given out the budget signaling an IMF deal and the recent developments of a Moody's downgrade and the further things happening in the economy. Will the anchor in the Ghanaian economy hold, even with the onset of an IMF program? The people to have this conversation with me starts with a very distinguished professor. He's an economist. He's previous, until recently, he was the board chair of the Ghana Revenue Authority. If you take that aside, he was also the board chair of the National Development Planning Commission, a man of extraordinary competence in economics himself. Professor Stinavda joins us. In this budget, the interesting conversation is that we have over 23 tax and other measures that have been detailed out there. Secondly, there are also other very exciting things that government is doing to reduce expenditure. Are these the right steps? Will it deliver the results that we want? Will it signal a return to the international capital markets the way we want it to be? That's the crux of our conversation today. Let me welcome Prof to this conversation. Prof, you're welcome to UPfront.
Very much.
Yes, Prof, you're welcome to UPfront. I hope you are doing well this evening.
Well, old age is not a disease.
Well, that's interesting to know. But Prof is joining us to have this conversation. I'm sure we have, sorted out the sound issues, so we can go straight to getting your very first. After some turmoil and disagreement, the finance minister finally had the opportunity to present the budget. Around the same time, this same minister was actually being held in for a censure vote and some hearing of a sort that happened in Parliament. What do you think about your preliminary thoughts, anyway, on the budget, on the processes that have led to the finance minister and the finance minister going to actually present this budget?
Thank you very much. First of all, I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to share my thoughts. With regards to the finance minister being called to Parliament with the possibility of being censured and asked to be removed by Parliament, I think that it was quite worrisome in the sense that this is the first in history of Ghana. But for me, I look at the 7 charges. There were 2 of them which to me were most worrisome, about conflict of interest and the fact that he's supposed to have stashed some $100 million elsewhere, which impinge upon his integrity. I have known Mr. Oforiatta for 22 years, almost 23 years now. And I can say that he's a friend, a businessman of high integrity, and a Christian. And therefore, for me, those 2 charges were very, very troubling. Fortunately, Parliament, the committee, didn't even ask him to answer them, which means that they couldn't charge him with conflict of interest. And I know that Data Bank has been part of all international capital placements by governments of Ghana, all of them in the Fourth Republic. And they have done that one with dispatch, Save Ghana, monies, and the rest. The second one was that it appeared as if he was actually starting some money somewhere else, whilst it was totally false. For me, I'm glad that those 2 are over. The rest depends upon opinion of economic management. And I don't agree with the Ministry of Finance or the Central Bank on all the issues. For example, I think that the Central Bank raising again 2.5 points, basic points, and therefore raising interest rate will harm the real sector, and you cannot just live by inflation targeting alone. Also, for example, I don't agree, as we will talk later on, that they have slapped 2.5% more VAT, while we are not collecting more than 50%. But for me, those ones are, we will wait for the Parliament to come out with their conclusion. But I think that our leaders must be very careful when you want to impinge on a person's integrity and almost branding him as a thief. I have no doubt at all that Mr. Kenufo-Addo has more integrity than 99% of all politicians I know in Ghana. And therefore, I thought it's something
that's interesting.
Like to put on record.
No, that's very interesting. I've heard even the journalist Anas Aremia Anas dragging the finance minister and the minister of state at the finance ministry to Shraj, complaining about some conflict of interest issues and others hurling similar accusations against the man who's been hounded consistently about his continuous stay in office. This is the first time I'm hearing anybody vouch for him openly, somebody who's not really in government.
Let me tell you that, when they take people on, they don't follow up. When they took him to Shrag exonerated him. And I think that is shameful for parliamentarians after Shrag had exonerated him to make it a basis of impeachment, so to speak. So, and I think that, I'm not saying that policy-wise, and we may have time to talk about policies. I believe that the NPP came to power overcommitting themselves. There was overborrowing. And, you may disagree with policy. And of course, there was internal as well as external factors. But I don't think that it is fair to impinge on the integrity of Kenufo-Addo. I know him personally, as a Christian, as a businessman, and as a politician. And if there's anybody in Ghana I can vouch for, none of his accusers can stand his integrity.
It's very interesting. No, I was actually referencing a recent development where Anas had actually dragged the finance minister to the Shraj. This is latest, not the previous one. That was actually done by, I think, other people, not necessarily Anas in this particular case. That's what I'm saying.
No. On that case, maybe I'm not abreast with that one, but
very well.
I will not comment on anything which is sub judice, because a Shrag is a sub judice, and therefore I'm talking about the one who was earlier. I will normally, as a member of the Judicial Council for 6 years, not comment on anything which is before has already been concluded. So let us await.
Now, I get your point 100%. Now, moving the conversation a bit forward and actually putting it in the right skills that we want to have it. Now, the budget. You saw and were told that this budget is going to signal to the people of this republic the kind of recovery we want and the way forward going into the future. Indeed, it's also going to talk about the IMF program and what we want to do with it. More importantly, though, there are two very important elements that comes to it. First, the revenue measures to bring in more revenue and make sure that we plug the holes that we have. And secondly, the other expenditure measures. First, let's take revenue. Do you think on the face of it, this budget has what it takes to raise the 144 billion we are seeking to not only raise through taxes and all the other grants that we are likely to get? Is it overambitious? But there's also a big budget to do with expenditure, a huge one, of course. Can we meet first the revenue targets we are putting here?
Well, revenue target issues are not a matter of prophecy. And the history of Ghana, and even in recent times, has been that we haven't been very, very successful in meeting revenue targets. In terms of, even when, despite during my term at GRA, we exceeded the target by 3 billion, it was still way below what was needed in order for Ghana to close the gap of the deficit and then also increase our tax GDP ratio. So it will be a miracle if all of them can be achieved. But the measures are quite great, and I expect that they will come very close to it. But I wouldn't be a prophet to say that they will be able to achieve them all. Because, for example, take the VAT. which they have increased it by 2.5%.
Yeah.
We are not collecting even 50% of the lower rate. And I don't see how you are going to increase VAT by 2.5 and think that you can rake in. So yes, they are ambitious. I wish them best. We should be able to achieve a lot more than before, but it will be a gargantuan task to meet those revenue targets.
Now, you mentioned VAT, for example. Some have said it would, in a very large scale, aid people to either avoid or evade taxes more. And we have chosen a very easy way out, especially when we are now recovering from what appears to be a serious economic crisis that we're still battling one way or the other. Is the decision to increase VAT in and of itself the right decision?
You know, I've gone through all the tax measures. The VAT one, there are two things which I would like to raise an issue. I think the VAT one, they could have still increased the revenue by making sure of compliance rather than increasing the rate. And if they don't exempt, say, raw materials and those inputs, I don't think that it's going to do us much good. Personally, of all the taxes, that's the only one. That's one of the those I would not have recommended. I don't think that should have been the case, because the effort should be at collecting those who are not paying and not increasing the rate. So that particular one, I am with those who are speaking against it.
Now, but the counter argument is that we need to signal to the investors, we need to signal to the IMF that we are looking for alternative means of raising revenue. Having to increase tax is perhaps the surest, because four main general revenue sources have been very prudent. You talk about VAT, you talk about income and corporate taxes, you also talk about excise and custom import duties. These ones give us the chunk of our, what they call it, revenue. Would it not be easy and the easiest thing to do than to attack these ones?
No, all the three measures I agree with. For example, the benchmarks, I think should have been removed yesterday. The exemptions 2 days ago and the rest. So all the three. The VAT, my issue is the fact that you are not being successful. We haven't been successful in collecting even the 12.5%. I hear that this China mall, for example, when they went and locked them up and they opened it, within 1 month, they got.
Well, I seem to have a difficulty with Professor Stephen Adair's line there. We should be able to bring him back on. So this conversation started with the revenue measures. I'm told he's back on. Nicely, Prof. You were talking about how it will be very difficult for government to collect the additional VAT it want to increase, and why that might not be the best of decisions to make now.
Yes. What I'm saying is that already we are not getting much from the 12.5%. We are not collecting even 50%. I've been a chairman of TRA. And that is where effort should be. And the case in point is that of the Accra Mall. I understand that when they locked them up and then they started complying, within 1 month, they got what they got from them for 1 year. So this should have been the area of concentration rather than the increase of the rate. But as for the ports, the exemptions, and those things, I back them 100%. Okay. You should have done them earlier.
So you did mention there, for example, the indication is that there's an excise tax reform which will include a revision to the taxation of cigarettes and tobacco products to align with the ECOWAS protocols. The reform also targets, excise rate for spirits above that of beers. There will be taxation of products such as electronic smoking devices and liquids, which are currently not taxed. These are the things you think it should be, and it's a step in the right direction.
Well, let me confess that I'm biased because I'm against those type of activities. And everywhere else, that is an area where you tax as much as possible. I am totally in support of them, even at a higher rate.
Now, the other one that you also mentioned is the very controversial one to do with benchmark discount policy, where we are going to phase it out in 2023 with the Customs Regulation 2016. It will be amended to allow for self-clearing of goods by importers at the ports of entry without records to a customs house agent. This morning, I heard importers. I also heard people who run some of these shops complaining that already they are struggling to get customers. Any attempt to worsen the climate when it comes to the cost involved in clearing goods and the import duty cost here is going to force them to pass on more cost to the consumer or sack people so they can break even.
Let me tell you that in managing an economy, there's a trade-off.
Okay.
The trade-off between domestic production and imports. Mm-hmm. Actually, I was surprised before I became chairman of GRA that this benchmark reduction to 50%. I told them, I said, who had that crazy idea from the first place? It shouldn't have happened at all. And if they pass it on so that imports become dearer, so be it. Let us have parallel production support for local production. We cannot think that in this country, importers of consumer goods mostly should be at par with those who produce locally. And so I think that it is in the right direction. I wanted it abolished earlier, and I'm glad that they have come to it now. Again, exemption galore. These foreign companies are those who are enjoying those so-called exemptions, the mining companies and the rest. And the Ghanaians are paying taxes. And I think that this is, so all the export and import taxes and the abolition of the exemption and increasing to 5% that of those exempt free zone companies, please, they are sitting there for years and they won't pay even 5%. Ghanaians cannot be the ones, cannot be worse off by these taxes. We are better off because it will encourage domestic production.
The argument is that as we speak, we are in a serious economic cost of living crisis. It would worsen that plight. Inflation is already 40.4%. Having to implement it now will be problematic. Do you agree?
So we should go and borrow more to meet government budget. I mean, sometimes people think that there's a Father Christmas somewhere. Eventually, unfortunately, Ghanaians must fund our development mainly. And at this moment, if we are not going to collect taxes, it will mean that we should borrow more. And in any case, the door to further borrowing is closed for a while. So you cannot eat your cake and have it.
Now, because of the conversation, let me also draw attention to the other interesting thing that came up in the budget. It says, in the spirit of burden sharing, the National Fiscal Stabilization Levy will be converted into a growth and sustainability levy to cover all entities. This is one of the ones that people have already also raised concerns about, that it's just further burden on the people. You agree?
Listen, any taxation is a burden on people. But the same people are those who are wanting free education, hospitals, roads, and others. The question is it equitable? This is the question you are, but the fact that Ghanaians must pay is not negotiable. So it's a question of equity that we may talk about. Mm-hmm. And there, for example, those in the higher income margin are being asked to pay 35, which is quite a shocker. I didn't think that they would go there because I thought 30% was okay, even though when I was in the UN, in America, it was 40%. So, I mean, you must look for equity and not so much. That's why VAT is a very serious one, because it cuts across and doesn't discriminate too much between the poor and the rich. But it's an equity issue. But the fact that we should pay, you can't sit in Ghana and say that, if we pay taxes, we are burdened, but we expect that somebody should take care of us. It's one of those things, it's political jargonry. In reality, we must pay our way. We are paying only 13.5% at most of our GDP in taxes. We should be paying an average of 18 to 22% if we are going to sustain our internal development.
There's a question, though. There's a question. Since we are wrapping up the conversation,
let me add, provided that we make sure that the leaky basket of corruption is plugged.
It's one of the issues I wanted to raise with you. Some have said that the biggest problem in this country is not the ability to raise or the quest for more taxes to be levied. The problem is that we are not only are we not collecting enough, we are also wasting the resources. So there's no justification for a country that's wasting a lot to put more money into that leaking basket.
The answer is that what you are is not an either or.
Okay.
We have to increase tax GDP ratio about 50% if we are going to make it as a country. But we must do something more, because both under the previous government and this government, the Transparency International corruption perception has hovered between 40 and 43%, which means that corruption has become endemic. But it's not an either or, because even if we got the 13.5, we are way below. And of course, corruption makes it worse.
Now, I'm concluding the point about this. Just today, Moody's further downgraded what they call a long-term issuer rating, sending some shockwaves down the spine of many people who thought that we're done with some of these downgrades, which have signaled a very terrible terrain for us in the last few months. Some say yeah.
Let me explain to you how these Moody things work. They are only measuring the ability of the country to service its debt, the ability to let foreigners take their money from Ghana when they want to, and the rest. And when you are under these type of conditions, the downgrade will occur. Anyway, the downgrade means you cannot borrow from the international market. You don't have capacity to borrow from the international market anymore anyway.
Yeah.
But as soon as the economy turns around, you will see a rapid revision of it. I'm not worried at all about these downgrades now. He that is down needs no fear, no fall. What we need is to take the measures that will turn the economy around, stabilize the city, and then improve our export earning, reducing our import bill. And they would, the same way as they have rapidly downgraded, they will rapidly upgrade. At this moment, that shouldn't be the problem at all, because Ghana is not going to the international market to borrow for quite a while. So therefore, it has little significance.
I get you. Now, Prof, on the expenditure outlines, some of the very major ones are interesting to actually look at. Government hopes to continue with the 30% cut in the salaries of president, vice president, and other political office holders. There is a part where government says to ensure continuous and effective review of government flagship programs. And some are raising concerns about what this continuous and effective review means currently. To ensure continuous and effective review of government flagship programs, beginning with the 2023 budget, all covered entities implementing government flagship programs will be required to prepare and submit a fiscal and financial performance report on these programs to the Ministry of Finance at least 6 weeks after the end of each quarter. Quarterly releases of all the flagship programs will be contingent on the submission of previous quarterly performance reports. Mindful of what has been the general conversation about whether or not to keep these flagship programs, does it come to you as some form of relief that government at least is engaging in some form of continuous and effective review of these government policies?
Well, some of us at your previous sessions, we have argued that there's a need to review them. But it's almost like YNTOBR policy. So I'm glad this continuous review and other things is a political jargon. What they are saying is that now they are going to look at the efficiency and efficacy, and so that we get value for money, and where they probably will have to suspend and delay implementation, they will do so in order for the fiscal situation to improve. So I think that is a good admission that there's a need and for review and monitoring of the flagship program, because it's like if you don't have sufficient budget and you say you are going to ride your car the same mileage and that, and you review it, you'll be in trouble. It's the same at the national level. So I think that it is the first clear admission of the need to review some of these policies, including even the free SHS, not to cancel it, but I think that there are a few things that some of us have been advocating to relieve the government, because it's, for example, not equitable. When somebody goes to boarding school, you pay his fees, accommodation, everything else, and another Ghanaian child has a day school and has to find transport himself and accommodation. No, you must standardize it and a few other things. So a review is most welcome.
Now, the other point that's been raised is what was happening previously, 30% in the salaries review of senior government officials. They say we are continuing with that policy. Many have said it yielded very little results in the previous attempt to actually reduce expenditure. Would it work now?
Two things. First of all, even before they came out, I think on your platform or another platform, I had advocated for 25%, and they came for 30%,
yes,
which was...
We discussed 25%.
That is a leadership. Yes, at a certain point, leaders must show that they are with the people, and I don't think any of them will suffer for reducing their emoluments by 30%. But there's still the need to cut the number of ministers and the size of government further. But that one is not going to bring so much revenue or reduce so much expenditure, but I think that is a good gesture. We must commend them for doing that one. But I hope that the president will reduce the size of government further by cutting the numbers and the ministries, and not just everybody should say, just get a haircut. Now we are all having a haircut, so they must go to Sakura.
What do you have in mind, the number of ministries that should be left currently?
Listen, both the previous government, I mentioned that the size of government was big, and then Akufo-Addo made it bigger. This country can be run with not more than 40 ministers. But Mahama was generous. He said that he should reduce to 65%. Of course, no, the politician will never do exactly what an opposition says. So let them do 66.
Okay, interesting. Anyway, so, you are suggesting that it should be reduced by about 20 ministers?
No. The ministers and the deputy ministers are over 100.
Yeah.
And they can cut it down to about 40.
Okay.
Big one. Then you should say, let me use my mother tongue. Now, what should I say? Niabre. That our eyes are red.
To signal seriousness in the economy, that we are bent on actually cutting back. That's what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I get your point on the reduction one. But how about all of this ban that's been placed on V8s or its equivalent, except for cross-country travel? And there's an issue that you were previously engaged in, convoys. Government says it's going to cut back convoy. You should be very excited by that.
I spoke on it on the first 6 months of the government.
Yeah. So, no. Yeah.
Later on, first of all, sometimes I realize that when they are going to a function, they would like to, people going separately, they would like to be together in order to enjoy the motorcade and clearing the way. But honestly, it is absolutely not necessary to have 15, 30 cars in a row. Please, some of us spend a lot of time, 21 years to be exact, in the diaspora. Not even in the rich countries will you see that number of vehicles, 4 V8s, going And let me tell you, they are very expensive. Oh. I just use mine, even not the V8, I use Pajero, and I went to Bimbila and back. You know, I spent about 3,000 Ghana cedis on fuel. Then I said, wow, go for Elbueka. So I think that they should, because the cross country will, the policy now will still allow them to have so many cars in a convoy outside Accra. And therefore, it is only a half solution. I think that they must, it's good for them on a day-to-day to use saloon cars. And mind you, all the ministers, in addition to the four-wheel, have nice saloon cars fueled by government. They can use it locally, but within the town. But still, the convoy, I mean, it is just, you know, when you are standing by the roadside or you are traveling, and then you have to stand by, stop, and let 20 V8s pass by you. And then later on, you are told that the country is broke. It doesn't send a good signal.
All right. Now, let me bundle this together with the convoy. There's a freeze that's been proposed on tax waivers for foreign companies with tax exemptions. And talking about freeze, as for companies in the free zone will be reviewed, including the mining, the oil and gas companies. There will be no exemptions to such entities for the 2023 financial year. There is also a freeze on recruitment into the civil and public service, except in very critical cases. One of the points that has been made also here is that no ministry, department or agency, including SOEs, is permitted public funds for the purchase and distribution of hampers. And there's a moratorium on the creation of new agencies and departments within government. First, the freeze on those two important things, tax waivers, and also freeze on recruitment. Already, Labour is unhappy with the part to do with freeze on recruitment. Is it a critical decision now?
The freeze of the tax exemption means that those who are enjoying it now will still enjoy it. But actually, even I wish that those can be reviewed where the law permits it. I think that, as I said in my preamble statement, that should have happened longer.
Okay.
But, you know, things have been before Parliament, and they have been dilly-dallying for years about reviewing this exemption one. On the public sector, there are certain things that must be made clear. The whole public sector is less than 700,000 people. So it is not the government of Ghana that employs Ghanaians. It is Ghanaians employ ourselves as private sector businesses, individual workers, the peasantry, the artisans. So don't make any mistake. The recruitment in the public sector is very, very marginal. And at the time when there is a financial crisis, a moratorium on it in selected area, and I think that they shouldn't say blanket, except that where there's a need, there should be a strict application and waiver. If a hospital doesn't have a nurse, you can't say that you are putting a freeze on. But the public sector wage bill cannot, because the public sector wage bill and that of debt servicing takes about 90+% of all our revenues. We can't continue. And I think that the governments of Ghana, both government and opposition, must know that we should look for employment elsewhere, and it's the private sector, and they should improve the atmosphere for entrepreneurs to be able to take on. For example, in my area, I employ 285 people, and I've taken on 11 more for national service people. And if entities are allowed and encouraged with tax incentives, especially for the younger people, so that they get experience, but the public sector itself cannot be the employment agency, irrespective of what the trade union is saying.
Okay, but you know that's already having the feedback of these trade unions who are insisting that it's going to worsen the plight of Ghanaians in general, and workers are taking a beating currently.
That's what I'm saying is that the public sector itself today, out of the 32.6 million Ghanaians, public sector employees are only about 700,000. So therefore, even if you increase it by 25%, it does not solve the unemployment problem. I think the macroeconomic atmosphere should improve, give incentive to the private sector, and that is where we are going to solve our unemployment problem. The trade unions, of course, would like to have more of their members, but not at this moment. And 1 year will not kill them.
Oh, that is interesting. Now, there's another point, though, which seeks to clarify this thing to do recruitment. There's a section in the budget that says the government will review the management of financial clearance to, among others, reflect a net zero hiring impact and be supported by a fiscal impact analysis, which shows a net zero fiscal impact, and control hiring into education and health sectors are part of measures to control hiring into the public services. These are social services that are so critical. Is it not problematic?
No, but what all that means is this. There's no extra money to recruit more numbers. So if some people are retiring, you can replace them, and so that the amount of money given to you, you can't get more than that. So that's one by the 0 1. Mm-hmm. And it's a question of the money being not there. I appreciate it. I mean, young people coming out need a job and other things, but I believe that the expansion should be in the private sector. And there are other measures that can allow the private sector to absorb more to compensate for this. And that's what we should be looking at, not the public sector, which is in some way already over. Some people think that it's bloated, but I would say I don't have the statistics to be able to confirm that one. So the public sector is limited, but the zero fiscals means that you can replace and not add on in the short term. I think that many people don't realize we are in an economic crisis. It's a very serious one, and you cannot do business as usual.
Okay. Now, there's a point, though, that I need to ask you. Not long ago, I saw a government report that suggested that we have in the pipeline some projects which actually go up to some over 70 billion cedis. That is massive, as in projects at different stages. Government says all non-critical projects that can wait for a year must be suspended. How will we determine non-critical projects? But ultimately, is this one of the prudent policies that's going to make sure that the economy and the tension or the heat in the economy is quite reduced this year? Mindful of the complaints about non-payment of contractors and all the demands by the people for projects in the various areas across the country?
Well, the answer is in your comment. At this moment, the state has not the money to continue to pay those billions. For example, let me be specific. I mean, we must improve our health. Mm-hmm. But you have to, within the 1 year, do 101 new hospitals when you don't have the money. So you may want to pace it and spread it over, say, 3 years.
Okay.
There are a lot of projects which are, as you are saying, ongoing. But if you don't have the finances, you can't say that you have a car and you have to have 3 tires and not the 4th one. You have to stop and have 4 tires on a few to run while you find money for the rest being garage. It's an inevitable slowdown because at this moment the country doesn't have the cash. And People don't realize that we are in a very serious economic situation for the next, I think that especially up to about August next year, about 10 months, it will take that type of time for things to stabilize. And unfortunately, during that time, there will be Ghanaians have to endure these challenges, including employment and completion of projects. It's not, I don't like it, but that's the reality.
Would it not slow down growth? Already we are targeting 2.8%. Is that a trade-off we should expect?
Well, that's why it's going to be 2.8. We should be growing about 8%. Okay. So that means that, we are going to suffer from some growth. But it all depends upon how you discriminate among the projects. For example, you cannot stop making rural farm areas accessible. They will not need a bitumen, but at least the bridges so that they can bring their. So at this time, you have to be very, very, very prudent in selecting things which will limit the impact of the economic downturn. For example, when I went to Bimbila, the transport from Nkwanta to Banda, you need a little bit more for it to be passable because a lot of yam are coming from there. So you want to do that one. But you don't go and put asphalt on East Legon roads.
Yeah, which is really happening, right? Okay, because they are evolving and developing those roads.
Enough. I said that you must choose making Nkwanta to Banda above asphalting where I was
just saying that it is currently happening. We are asphalting East Legon roads. That's why I'm just drawing attention to, Prof. I mean, other areas too, not only East Legon, to be fair.
Yes. I must say that they are also doing the Kwabenya Kitasi, which passes through my village of Brekusu.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Now, Prof, the very conversation that we are having, already the likes of Professor Godfred Bokwen think that some of these revenue and expenditure measures are skewed towards having a greater impact on the people rather than on government. And that to him, government should have shown massively by cutting back rather than pushing most of the measures into skewing and getting more money from the people of this country. He says it's disproportionate in the incidents that's supposed to be felt by the people. Do you agree?
Well, my young economist must be very careful when you say that one, because to some extent, apart from the size of the government, which we talk about the ministries, the government, when he does road, is he doing it for the government or he's doing it for the people? When he does the hospital. So we must be, in this regard, it's not prudent to be thinking about, this is the government who must suffer and these are the people who must get a relief. The government does the projects for the people. So you may talk about corruption, we may talk about size of government, yes, but 90%, 95% of everything government does, he does it for the people. So you can't say that, what the government is more or less enjoying. I mean, in that sense, what they are doing is also unprecedented. The fact that fuel is being reduced by 50% when fuel prices have more than doubled. It's almost like they are now getting a quota of the fuel. And they say that they are not doing enough. For me, it's the size of government, the ministries and that's the only area. But what they have done is quite commendable.
Now, let me put them all together. When you look at the revenue measures compared to the expenditure measures, are these the kind of measures you were expecting to see, or we could have done better?
First of all, I think that I went through and counted all the expenditure measures and the reductions. And for the first time in our national situation, we have actually having about 18 or so expenditures being reduced rather than increase in a budget. Quite unprecedented, and this reflects the situation there. I think that apart from the size of government, what they have done is quite commendable and just by my expectation. As for the revenue side, I told you that apart from one or two, the VAT, I think that also they are in the right direction. I'm surprised you didn't talk about e-levy.
I was coming
the
to
e-levy,
raise that later on because
that,
it's part of the measures people are complaining about. The minority in parliament is already indicating that they would not accept the removal of the thresholds.
Well, whether they will not. The question is that when the tax measure is there, you can't say of course, the opposition can oppose it in parliament, but the ordinary person. But I think that the 1% should stay. I supported the levy right from the beginning. Let me tell you, because the economy is shifting to electronic-based one. And part of the shock, for example, even me as an economist, for about 3 months, I wasn't sending anything by Momo for some time. But I realized that it cost me far more to get money to my people than the taxes, and I have come back to it. And already, so I think that it's a matter of time. I would, the 1% I think is okay. And as for the threshold, I don't know why they touched it there, but I would have left that one untouched. But it's a give and take when you are budgeting. But I think that personally, right from day one, I said that time will vindicate the e-levy. It's a matter of time. We all got shocked, but I thought it's one of the most ingenious sources of taxation. Let them adjust it by the down as they have done, but we will get used to it.
Okay. Now, there's a little bit more I want to share with you from the budget. Total revenue and grants are supposed to be somewhere under 44 billion. Total expenditure is over 190 billion. The main expenditure items are compensation, 45 billion, and interest payment, 52 billion, which is up to like 97 billion, which means that total expenditure minus total revenue is something around 47 billion. Let's look at it from this perspective, Prof. Expenditures measure items, which is compensation and interest payments. If you really look at it from the perspective that all of these are things we cannot really touch, it leaves out a bit of the total expenditure, which is 93 billion, which will be used for things like grants to other government units. Some 30 billion will be that. Capital expenditure will be 27 billion, which almost doubled the amount of money we actually devoted for capital expenditure last year. Other expenditures, including energy sector payment shortfalls, goes up to 26 billion. And we have just some 550 million for social benefits, and subsidies are taking 250 million. There are some looking at this and says this is not a frugal, what they call it, budget, signaling a country that's bent on cutting back, mindful of the other expenditure items that we could look at differently. For example, why do we have almost double capital expenditure budget?
Except that you are wanting a road in your village. So, no, I think that there are certain, running a country is like your home. You cannot say that, you are going to stop things, almost everything in the middle. And of course, remember, this is cities. So in terms of the real value, the city has fallen, prices have gone up. So in real terms, there's not been that much increase. So what you are talking about doubling is in reality not doubling.
Okay.
It's just number two. That's where we are waiting for the IMF and possible haircut or Sakura. What's coming is that to spread the interest payments, because our interest payment, if you look at the profile of our debt, the next 3 years has peaked. So it's a matter of trying to spread it, and after the 3 years, it is lower. So it's like instead of paying for 50 billion now, and then in 4 years pay 25, stretch it so that it becomes 30, and release some. So I think that once the IMF program and then how the debt restructuring comes out, you will see that the debt servicing will go down. When it comes to the for the emoluments, that's the reason why you cannot increase the number of the public sector employees now.
Yeah, Prof, you're making the point.
No, I was finishing.
Okay.
That's the reason why you cannot add on to the public sector wage bill.
Now, let me now go to the very things that is keeping us where we are today. Things like the exchange rate, the other things that are also connected to what was in the budget, which is to do with the interest rates. There's an admission that the exchange rate situation actually added some 93 billion to our debt, which is worrying. Government is seeking, among other things, to try and fix it. There are those who are concerned about how we are fighting exchange rates and whether or not it's sustainable.
Well, once again, it's easy to throw these numbers about, but the dollar loans are not serviced in cedis. They are serviced by our exports. So even though the cedi rate, if you convert the dollar's portion into cedis, it makes it high. It doesn't mean that we are going to pay more dollars, and we will normally not convert. The government doesn't convert cedis to pay it. The government uses our dollar earnings to pay it. So it is how statistics are banded about. So the 93 billion exchange rate makes local reckoning seems huge, but the dollar rate remains the same. And unfortunately, it is still our cocoa and our oil and our gold. So it doesn't, the fact that it has added 93 billion hasn't increased our dollar servicing. That is why the most important one is the cedi, because then the revenues being collected are used to pay it. So I am not worried at all by the so-called increase in the debt, foreign debt, because the cedi has fallen, because we don't translate, we don't do exchange of cedis to go and pay it. So it is an interpretation of statistics.
In conclusion, currently in Parliament, there are concerns that majority MPs or ministers have abandoned duty. So some of them are in Qatar watching football. Some are complaining about why, instead of participating in the budget debate, some of them are not available to do what's required of them. So consistently in the last 2 days, there have been more minority MPs than majority MPs who are supposed to be pushing government agenda. Is this a worrying trend for you?
Well, if the MPP people think that it is their anti-Kenneth Ofori-Atta strategy, they will pay it in their own sweat. Of course, I must it's good that the opposition is there. The MPP people can stay at home, and very soon, if they continue, Ghanaians will ask the NDC to come. After all, if they are the one deciding and discussing the budget, they must as well manage it. So it is a suicidal policy or actions, but people still commit suicide.
Prof, I am grateful for your time this evening, and I'm happy to have heard from you. I mean, you've not been speaking for some time, so I hope you are doing great and enjoy your evening.
Thank you very much. I like your tie.
Well, folks, that's where we end today's edition of Upfront. We actually looked at the revenue and expenditure measures in the budget, asked very distinguished economists to give us some view on this particular one, and you heard it there.